Welcome everybody, I am back and bringing you guys a brand new movie review. This is going to be for Hugh Jackman's Logan, which came out in 2017. It's also directed by James Mangold, who's supposed to direct the Boba Fett film, which was eventually canceled. You know, this movie is one of my favorite films, and it's one of the first of sort of the R-rated superhero films to kind of do something with a different take. So if you're thinking that this is going to be safe for kids, it's definitely not. This movie opens up, you see sort of an old beaten down Logan. He's pretty much trying to live a normal everyday life while trying to take care of Professor Xavier. Professor Xavier is played by Patrick Stewart, and you see him sort of confined to a wheelchair. At the beginning of this film, you kind of see what a normal everyday life is like for Logan. He's pretty much a limousine driver for, not only, celebrities, but also normal average everyday people. And at one point in time in this movie, you also get to see him drive around sort of a bachelorette party. And, one of the bachelorettes who's actually getting married actually flashes Hugh Jackman's character and stuff in this movie. So there is a little bit of element of nudity. So if you're thinking that this is going to be sort of a movie that's geared towards children, you're definitely mistaken. Definitely don't take your kids to this movie, because there is a lot of blood. There is a lot of violence within this film, and I really do think that it is definitely warranted within this film. This movie stars Hugh Jackman, Patrick Stewart, Daphne King, as well as Boyd Holbrook. Boyd Holbrook plays this sort of main bad guy. He's sort of a mutant with sort of a mechanical hand, and this movie relies a lot on sort of the old Terminator style of storytelling, where you've got sort of a protector character trying to protect a young kid, whether that's, a girl in this movie or a young boy, aka John Connor in the Terminator franchise. And I really don't mind that it feels kind of like a Terminator film and a Western film, because this kind of combines elements of both. You've got, Logan, who's pretty much the Terminator character, where he's pretty much a half man, half, biological machine, and he's pretty much bred from the Weapon X program, as you know, and he's got adamantium for claws. In this movie, you see sort of a weaker version of Logan. He's old, he's beaten, and he's pretty much been abused by society, and that's why he's trying to escape. Whereas you've got Laura, who's, Weapon X, and she's also, spoiler alert, as you'll find out later on in this film, which I don't know if you haven't, seen Logan or any of the other X-Men franchises, why you'd be interested in watching this movie. You should have already seen this movie already, because this is a fantastic film. She is eventually Logan's daughter. They pretty much share similar genes. They're both made from the same sort of research development program in the X-Men universe that's trying to kind of create these clones and these super soldiers. And you even got a clone of Logan that's kind of trying to hunt down Logan throughout this film. At the beginning of this film, it's kind of cool because you kind of see the father figure element to Logan kind of take place. He's caring for Professor X, who's this old, brittle old man. And, Professor X, while he's a little bit weaker than he is in sort of, X-Men X2 and even sort of X-Men Days of Future Past, which are three of the best, X-Men franchise films in this universe. Some would say First Class is even that good, but I didn't really like it as much as I like Days of Future Past and some of the earlier X-Men films. But you see him taking care of Professor X. He needs kind of pills and stuff like that so that his powers don't sort of go out of whack and stuff throughout this film. He's really reliant on Logan for pretty much his care and to kind of care for himself, otherwise he might die. And you kind of see that throughout this movie, that this is the last ditch effort for Logan to kind of save the mutant program and sort of regain balance of his life. Throughout this movie, he's kind of denying sort of who he is as sort of an X-Men and sort of a leader of that franchise. He doesn't want to do it anymore. At one point in time in this movie, they're at a bar and he's telling Laura about the fact that maybe 90% of the stuff that happened in that comic book is real and the other half is pretty much made up. And sort of he's trying to say that it's just a bunch of bullshit, that, people write these stories and they're basing some of it on truths and others on sort of myths and legends about the X-Men sort of franchise and stuff. There's this place that she has to get to with a set of coordinates called Eden or something like that within the comic book. She's constantly pressuring Logan to kind of get there, and he's like, at first I refuse to take you because I don't really believe that it's real, and that even if you get there, that it's probably not going to happen the way that you think. Laura kind of coaxes him eventually to kind of take her there, and even her motherly figure in this film, who eventually gets killed, spoiler alert, by the same people that are kind of hunting him down, she kind of shows him sort of a pretty well edited video. And I think this is one area of suspension of disbelief that people kind of have issues with, that it's on an iPhone, and it's this really well edited video that kind of shows them going through the research facility where they're kind of sort of creating these mutants. You kind of wonder how they got sort of the footage and got it out without somebody noticing, and how they pretty much edit it all together on an iPhone. But you kind of ignore that for the sake of the story, and eventually that leads Logan eventually finds out that Laura is her daughter, and that there's something more to this kid than just this average everyday young girl. Sort of there's this really epic fight sequence that takes place in this mining mill. You see it's sort of these special forces soldiers sent in by Boyd Holbrook's character in this film, and they just get completely wasted by Laura and Wolverine. They eventually, after they discover that Weapon X and Laura are pretty much the same person, they eventually go in there and trying to grab her, and that's when you see Logan come in. He's just taking fools out one by one, kind of Predator style, and it's a pretty awesome sequence. I think if you see this on the big screen, you're going to really appreciate this. This movie pretty much opens up where you see sort of a group of Spanish people pretty much stealing car pieces from Logan's limousine. He wakes up, and there's also a pretty brutal and intense sort of scene where you kind of see that Logan's powers have dwindled. His claws don't really come out as far as, hope, and so he's pretty much using his wits and his brutality to kind of take these guys guys on and eventually kill them, which he does. And that kind of leads to the bar sequence where you kind of learn that, she has to get to the Canadian border so that, hopefully she can lead these mutants to safety. And, that's where you kind of see that Logan doesn't really believe that this place is real, but he eventually helps her out anyway, just because he wants to get Laura from A to B and kind of get rid of her so that he and Professor X can kind of make the money he needs to kind of go across the border so that way he can kind of live his own life in sort of a way like that. And, this movie takes a lot of cues not only from the Terminator, but from Western films. It's pretty much a lone wolf sort of situation like the old Clint Eastwood films, like The Man with No Name and The Good and the Bad and the Ugly and stuff like that. And, this really fits that sort of genre really well. I think that, combining those film genres into one really does help sort of the story further along, and it really makes it feel like a realistic version of what an X-Men film would be. You kind of get the sense that, Logan is beaten, he's brutalized, he doesn't really have any faith in society, he kind of just wants to do his own thing and protect his own. But you kind of get that when there's a sequence that takes place on a highway, their truck kind of breaks down, and this African-American couple kind of help him out, and this family kind of takes him into their home. They kind of have a dinner sequence. The family kind of asks what these people do, and Professor X says that he was once a teacher for like disabled kids and stuff like that. He doesn't really tell them fully what happened to the mutant school that he was teaching and everything, the fact that, Logan was a teacher at his school. They kind of hint that was what was going on in sort of the sequence, which I think was a really cool sequence. And then later on, you sort of see that Laura is a little bit more human than she kind of portrays to be. All the while in this film, you see her, she really speaks Spanish throughout most of this film, and she's kind of giving Logan shit for being her father, even though Logan doesn't really know at first that, she is his child. At one point in time, there's a scene in the truck where Laura's giving him shit. He's kind of questioning why doesn't she just speak English so, he can understand her. And later on, find out that, she can speak English, which is kind of funny. Usually in Hollywood, they have that saying, don't work with child actors, don't work with pets and stuff like that. But this kid is really intelligent, especially for this film. You kind of get that with the way that she talks, the way that she kind of moves, that she has sort of the unique ability about her, kind of related to Logan in some sort of way. And, later on in the film, you kind of see sort of the bonding between Logan and Laura happen, especially with how the ending of the film takes place, which is really heartbreaking seeing. Even to this day, when I see that sequence, I'm even heartbroken the fact that they actually went that route with Logan in the sort of franchise. But I know that Hugh Jackman didn't really want to play this character that much anymore. I heard that if he was brought on to sort of the Avengers films that he might actually come back, which we'll actually see if that actually ends up happening. I would really like to see them do that and, kind of bring Logan into sort of the Avengers so that way he and Deadpool could maybe have a fight sequence or something like that, or maybe kind of team up within the later films. But Logan and sort of Patrick Stewart's character, they eventually make it to that farmhouse sequence. Laura and this African-American boy kind of having a bonding moment, and you see that when this kid is kind of listening to music and stuff, and Laura kind of wants to take the iPod or whatever, the MP3 player device that he's listening to, and kind of starts listening to music and stuff. He's like, oh, do you like that stuff? And she's like, yeah, kind of interesting and stuff like that. And she herself has been kind of a more poor sort of individual, so she would have no idea sort of what music is, or maybe has heard of music and stuff before, but, hasn't had the sort of luxury to have access to everything like that kid has in this movie, and says that you can keep it for the night and everything, and she eventually does. That's when sort of the mutant clone of Logan kind of comes into play. He tracks him down at this farm. Eventually there's this scene that's kind of really brutal and really epic in a way because, this mutant clone of Logan is pretty much just slaughtering everybody in this place, taking no prisoners. The African-American father in this film kind of takes a shotgun and starts going after Logan's clone and everything. You get the feeling that Logan doesn't really know what's happening, why this person's there tracking him down and everything, but he eventually gets the hint that it's the same sort of person before that was trying to hunt down Logan and Laura from the sort of mining sequence. Laura and Wolverine eventually escape. Professor X, spoiler alert, ends up dead, which is also heartbreaking. You kind of lose sort of that sort of father figure that Logan was kind of attached to, and even Professor X, which I think he later regrets saying that his biggest disappointment in Logan was that, he didn't take sort of the school for gifted children seriously, that Professor X kind of believed in him, but Logan never really believed in himself, and he thinks that, Logan was pretty much his most regrettable sort of thing in his life, and that really haunts Logan, especially within the rest of this film. You really get the feeling that Logan really respected Professor Xavier and stuff. Throughout this film, you see sort of Professor X kind of spazzing out in certain sequences when sort of powers kind of depleted. Professor Xavier is kind of fighting back against Logan and sort of his, fatherly aspects in this film, and Logan's just trying to be a good caregiver and trying to help Professor X survive. Once this scene happens, you kind of see that all was for naught, but not necessarily, because eventually Logan will eventually lead these kids to Eden, and once he gets to the border, that's where you kind of see Logan start to realize, that not everything that Laura was saying was actually complete bullshit, and that there's still some stuff about her that is actually kind of true. And he starts to realize that this kid is actually his child, and he'll pretty much do everything it takes to kind of protect her. There's another attack against the mutants, and you kind of see that within the sequence where they cross the border, sort of these military grade trucks with Boyd Holbrook's character and Pierce kind of coming after them with soldiers and stuff, and these mutant kids are kind of taking down sort of the vehicles and stuff. And there's this epic chase sequence that leads with Logan going to berserker mode with his claws and stuff and running across the fields and taking out soldiers and stuff, which you see in the trailer, so it's not really a spoiler alert. All that kind of leads to Logan eventually passing away. Logan gets taken out by sort of these military vehicles. He kills eventually the clone of Logan that was pretty much hunting him down throughout this entire film in sort of an epic fashion. I'm not going to spoil it for you guys because I really want you guys to see this movie. And both of them end up dead. And that's when you sort of see the scene at the end of the film where Laura, who's pretty much distraught about the fact that, this guy that she's just met, who turns out to be her father, is just taken out in the span of a couple of days. And you see that really cool sequence where she takes a couple of tree branches and puts them into sort of a cross. And once the kids leave and everything, she tells them to continue across the border. She actually takes the cross and points it sort of an X, sort of for the X-Men sort of universe and everything. And I thought that was a really, really cool way to kind of end this film. At the beginning of the movie, you see sort of Logan at a funeral sequence. He's kind of pissed off by the fact that some of his other mutant friends have been killed off and stuff as well, which is also kind of a thing that you kind of see throughout this film, is that everybody that, Logan pretty much cares about, sort of like Ash from the Evil Dead franchises, ends up dead. People that Logan has kind of grown up with get killed by these people that are hunting him down, and eventually Logan himself dies. And, I didn't really want this scene to take place. I thought it was kind of weird that they kind of killed Logan off in this franchise, but I know that Hugh Jackman said that he didn't really want to continue this anymore unless he was kind of put in part to the Avengers franchise. But even still, it's kind of a heartbreaking scene because you've cared about this character forever. You've cared about Wolverine as sort of one of the main X-Men characters, and then, they just do a 180 and pretty much kill him off. Like, it's kind of heartbreaking, but at the same time, it's really cool kind of the way that they did it. And then that's when this movie ends, and I really give this movie props to using a lot of realistic sort of practical effects, whereas a lot of movies that are set in sort of the comic book franchise use a lot of CGI, constantly using it sort of as a crutch. This movie doesn't do that. This movie's got really good one-liners and stuff throughout this film. It kind of harkens back to sort of the old school Western films of its time and kind of does it in a sort of modern day fashion. And this movie's all around awesome. I think James Mangold and his directing abilities are really, really good, which is kind of disappointing to see that his Boba Fett film was canceled, because I think it could have been really, really good, especially if they did something similar to Logan for the Star Wars franchise. This is one of the first 2 R-rated films that kind of got me back to the whole superhero thing, because I was a little bit burnt out after sort of the Marvel films. I'm kind of done. I'm kind of bored of sort of the superhero genre. And then Deadpool came out, and then Logan came out, and they're both R-rated sort of adult film superhero flicks, and they kind of brought me back to the fold. Everything down to the music, the special effects, to the practical effects, to the the story and the music and stuff. All of it kind of fit well in this universe. And if you watch the black and white version, it's even better, just because it kind of feels like an old school Western film and stuff. So I would highly recommend you get the Blu-ray for that. But overall, I think this movie gets an A+ from me. This movie is definitely one of those films that has rewatchability factor. And even now, every once in a while, I'll plug in this film, especially when I'm feeling down or sick or something like that. I'll watch this movie, and it kind of gives me hope to kind of continue with what I'm doing and stuff. I really do think that fans of the X-Men franchise are really going to enjoy this movie. So if you haven't seen this movie yet, which again, I don't know why you haven't, definitely go check this out. This is definitely worth your time. You're going to really enjoy sort of the banter between Professor Xavier and sort of Logan as he's trying to get them all to safety, as well as, how he's dealing with sort of the fact that he is now a father figure after believing for several years that he's never had a child and stuff, but sort of this government created her with his own genetic material, which is a little bit of freaky situation when you kind of see that footage and what these kids have had to gone through, which is why you kind of understand their plight to kind of get out of there. And just the overall aesthetic of this film is really, really good. So that is my review of Logan. Again, I would highly recommend it to anyone that's a movie fan, that's a fan of really well-crafted cinema. So as always, guys, hopefully you guys learned a thing or two about filmmaking and stuff like that. And if you like this video and want to see more in the future, please rate, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.